Hi guys, this tutorial is aimed to go through with you English Language Paper 1 Question 5, which is the narrative descriptive writing task. This is just my approach, one way I think is a good way to tackle it. It'll work for some of you, not for others. You will have all been taught how to tackle this task with your in-class teachers and done lots of practice. So this really is just one way you could do it. This is designed to work with the slides of tasks which are on Show My Homework. So the idea is that you watch this tutorial, it gives you an approach, I'll model some ideas, and then you have a go at doing the tasks and adapting them to this approach. And as and when you do them, you email them to your teacher, you get some feedback. Just really because if you keep practicing your writing, you're going to have a much better chance if you ultimately end up doing an exam. Okay, so first of all, a quick reminder that the exam task will look like this. So you will have an either or situation. You get to choose which task you do. One of the tasks will be a picture, and you will be asked to produce a piece of descriptive or story writing in relation to the picture, or you will be given a written task. So for this one, we've got either write a narrative, that just means a story, as suggested by the picture. We've got a pretty open picture here of a young woman outside, got a nice sort of countryside backdrop to it. The second task, write a description of a time when you enjoyed yourself in a new environment. Now, immediately with these two tasks, I'm drawn towards the picture because it's more general than the descriptive task. I don't always prefer the picture. Sometimes I prefer this second task, this written task. But on this occasion, I think the generalness of the picture, the fact that we've got a nice open backdrop, a nice countryside setting, an image of a young woman, makes it a far more open task. Okay, so the other thing I just wanted to remind you of is the mark scheme. So fundamentally, you're being marked on several different factors as summarised roughly by these headings. So you're being assessed on how good your story is, basically. Is it enjoyable and engaging to read? And is it well structured? Now, the way I always teach this story writing is to try to use what we call a non-linear structure. That means a structure that doesn't just start at the beginning and work through chronologically, but uses a bit of flashback to vary it up. So my classes, I always teach them the 5-part story structure. The beginning sets the place or the weather. So the first paragraph is all about creating a picture of where the action of the story is going to happen. Paragraph 2 is then zooming in on a character, shifting away from describing the environment, the setting, to introducing a person. Paragraph 3, I always suggest, is a flashback to a happy memory. So the character you've introduced in paragraph 2, something makes them think about something that happened in the past. This means that we create a lovely structural shift as we move away from physical description into inside the mind of the character. I then suggest that we stay in the flashback, but we move forward in time a little bit, and we drop the mood. So the flashback to an initial happy memory shifts to a more sad memory, as something went wrong in our character's life. And then finally, our last paragraph can just literally be one sentence that creates a circular link. So whatever some idea we've introduced in our first paragraph, we link back to at the end. So we've got lots of nice things going on there. We've got some physical description, we've got some internal sense of the character, we've got some changes of mood, and we've got a nice cyclical approach. You're also assessed on your language. So within the quality of your story, it's not just about how you organise it and structure it, but also the words you use. Noun phrases, metaphors, simile, personification. Those are the basic tools you have as a writer to bring the story to life, to really make the reader feel what it is to be in that character's shoes, what it is to stand in that location. Linked to that is obviously vocabulary. You get marks for how ambitious and adventurous your vocabulary is in setting the tone. And punctuation is the other side of it. SPAG generally, so spelling, punctuation and grammar. But I always suggest to my classes that we want to try and use at least 5 different punctuation marks. Full stops and capital letters are the absolute basics. They have to be there. Likewise, commas, we need those within our sentences so that our sentences make sense. Semicolons and dashes allow us to bring a bit more variety to our construction. Lastly, I think it's a really good idea with narrative writing to control the speed and to use phrasing that tells the reader if things are happening quickly, slowly, and to create these shifts of speed within it. So this little sort of knowledge organizer really just shows an idea of how to build a non-linear narrative, making sure that we've got some key elements which are going to enhance the enjoyment of the reader, but also in this context, hopefully score you decent marks. And it's worth noting at this point that whichever task you choose, whether it says write a story or write a description, it doesn't actually matter which you write. As long as you write a story that has got lots of description in it, you won't be penalised for if you don't write it as a description. Okay, so I'm going to show you through the process of writing a generic story, just a story in my mind that I think works. My opinion of this exam task is that writing a story is really hard. It's incredibly complex, and I don't think many writers, professional writers, would choose to write a story in 45 minutes in an exam hall in timed conditions, because it's an art of the creation of a story. So in my opinion, it's much better to have a story in mind, or a couple of different stories, a plot and a narrative that follows these different headings that you then adapt to whatever task you've picked in the exam. So rather than trying to think of a story, all you're doing is thinking, okay, this is my story. How am I going to adapt it to this task? How am I going to make sure it's really good? So my story that I use as a kind of generic skeleton, which I then try to adapt to different contexts, is a little bit sad, but fundamentally it's about an old man. And I open my story with my man, and he is on a beach. Now, obviously, the setting has to change if the task dictates a different setting, but generally I like a beach. Beautiful, remote setting in the winter time, so there's hardly anyone there. Beaches are so beautifully atmospheric. We've got the waves, we've got lots of different sights. So I always start my story on a beach with my atmospheric mood. I then introduce a character, and as I've said, I always introduce an elderly man. He's alone, he's on the beach, he's walking. And in my paragraph describing the place, generally I make it a little bit inhospitable. Not the kind of day you'd expect an old man to be walking on the beach. And by doing so, it allows me to set up a little bit of a mystery, a little bit of an enigma, if you like, about why he's there. I introduce my old man, I build him up, give him lots of character, create a sense of the beauty of the character. And then in my third paragraph, I flash back to a happy memory, which again might be dictated by the image or the task I'm completing, but generally I like him to remember his wedding day. He married his wife, the love of his life, and had a wonderfully happy life with her. Now this is when it gets a bit sad, because then I drop in a change of mood. And basically, I'm going to kill off his wife, which, is sad, but it's fiction, so it's okay. And he remembers the reason it transpires that he's on the beach on this slightly bleak day is because it's an anniversary. It's a significant date. This is the place they used to walk together when they were younger. But since she's died, his life has perhaps lost some of the joy it once had. And then lastly, once I introduce this moment of change, this time when things went wrong for my old man, I take it back to the beginning. He's back on the beach and we're forward in time again. So it's a really simple story. It's sad and it's emotive. It gives us lots of potential to build. But it also gives us a nice generic structure that we can work with. Okay, so in terms of building my story, as I say, I always start with my scene. The beach if the task allows it, but that's not essential. My old man can be anywhere. He could be in a park, he could be in a city, he could be anywhere that's appropriate for the picture or the task I'm working with. But I always start by creating a strong impression of the place and the weather. And you'll find that professional writers, some of the greatest writers, always build a description of the weather. It's so effective at setting the scene and building a sense of atmosphere. Now, what I would suggest then is 5 sentences that describe the place. Now that sounds easy, but actually it can be quite tricky because we want to just say everything in one sentence. So what I suggest is you have at least 4 to 5 sentences that build this description of place, and that the first one gives an overview of the weather conditions. The second one establishes the time of day. The third one introduces a sound. And then in the fourth sentence, we change something ever so slightly. Could just be that, we started with it very early, so the sun was barely out, and then by the last paragraph, the sun's out more. But it's just a subtle shift or change. The key thing I would say with this is when you're describing the weather, don't jump about all over the place. I often see students who start by describing the clouds, and then suddenly they're describing the sea, and then they're describing something else, and we're all over the place. One sentence, stay in one location. So if you're describing the clouds, stay in the sky for that sentence. Don't mix different things, different geographical positions together, because it can quickly lead to muddled writing. But I'll demonstrate what I mean by that as we go through. Okay. So in terms of sentence 1 then, as I've said on this slide, the first thing I suggest you do, your very first sentence of your story, is to set the weather, to describe what it's like for the weather. And to nail this down further so that your first sentence is so automatic and you can get straight to writing, I suggest that your very first sentence could follow this grammatical structure. So you start with a prepositional phrase. That just means a phrase that starts with a preposition, a word that tells us the location or position of something. Prepositional phrases, if they come at the beginning of a sentence, must always, always, always be followed by a comma. Then we'll have the main clause. We'll have a little bit of information about something that's happened, followed by another comma and an ing clause. So it's quite a nice, grammatically complex sentence to get us going. Okay, so I think all this will make more sense if I show you what I mean by these different elements, because if you can see them, it becomes much more straightforward. Okay, so just get myself a little text box. So prepositional phrase, easiest way to start a prepositional phrase is simply... Okay, so the easiest way to create a prepositional phrase is just to start with the word as. As is a preposition and it leads us into what we're going to say. So I'm describing the weather, giving just a general overview of what the weather conditions are like. I want my scene to be a bit cloudy, a bit morose. This isn't going to be a happy story, so I want to signal that to my reader at the beginning. So as grey clouds continued to gather overhead, comma. And that's all I mean by a prepositional phrase. Instead of just saying grey clouds continue to gather overhead, I've just put the word as in there at the beginning, and that then becomes a prepositional phrase. As I say, if we put a prepositional phrase at the beginning of a sentence, we must follow it with a comma. As grey clouds continue to gather overhead, now I need something else about the weather. So it makes sense to me if there's grey clouds in the sky that there might be fine spots of rain. Rain, clouds goes together, doesn't it? Makes sense. So fine spots of rain fell from the sky. And then lastly, I want this ing clause. Sometimes it may not work, but it just adds another grammatical element to show the complexity of your sentences. As grey clouds continue to gather overhead, fine spots of rain, oh, don't know why I put rain in there, rain fell from the sky, dampening the sand. And obviously I've gone out of the sky now, but rain comes out of the sky, so that's why I've done it. Okay, so why don't you have a go at writing your own sentence that follows that structure but describes a different weather condition? Maybe it's a bright sunny day instead. So try and have those 3 grammatical elements in it. Once you've done that, pick up the next video, please.